We go over there, we sing all kinds of other songs like 5 Foot 2 Eyes of Blue. We do that one sometime. We do that a lot. They like that a lot. For the old folks over there, we have a nice opportunity. But what really bothers me about it, sometimes they're guitarists. They don't know anything about individual notes. They don't know anything about that. There's no chords. So they say, oh, we don't want to do it in the key of A. Let's try the key of E. Well, that's fine for them. The key of E is what, 4 or 5 sharps? Forget it. All right, I'm out of here. I can't handle 3 sharps is about my maximum. So I really have a hard time with them. But I enjoy playing with them. And I'm sorry they couldn't make it here today. Some of them were supposed to be, but something must have come up. I invite you now to turn in your scriptures you have here. I'm preaching from Matthew. Matthew, here we got the 22nd chapter, verse 15 through 22, and entitled, The Things of God. Turning now from these texts we find in the New King James Version. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent to him their disciples with Herodians, saying, Teacher, we know that you are true, and teach the way of God in truth, nor do you care about anyone, for you do not regard the person of men. Tell us, therefore, what do you think? Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why do you test me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money. So they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, Whose image and inscription is this? They said to him, Caesar's. He said to them, Render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. When they heard these words, they marveled and left him and went their way. This is a very, very interesting experience as related in the Gospels. This is one of those stories. We find it in Matthew. We also find it in Mark. In fact, many of the scholars believe that Matthew probably copied Mark. We know that Mark's gospel was the first one to have been written, so it was available to most of the writers of their day. And so that there are certain sections in some study books I've got. You've got parallel editions of the gospel. Some of them go all the way to the Gospel of John as well. So you got them paralleled right there, and you can scan down there, especially with Mark in the middle here, and see places where Matthew and Luke are copying practically word for word of what's written in Mark. Sometimes Matthew changes it a little bit. Sometimes Luke changes it a little bit. Sometimes a lot. But generally speaking, there are places in here where they copy Mark a lot. So this was in Mark's story as well, which is an indication of how important these early teachers who brought us these Gospels were, and thinking that this was a story that needed to be paid some attention to. And so what story do we have here? Jesus is out teaching as he normally does at this time. And there were these 2 groups coming up to test him. Now, it's an interesting set of people coming up here. One group is the Pharisees. Now, we believe generally that Jesus himself is a Pharisee. Pharisees, we have some negative connotation about the Pharisees. But the thing about it is, the Pharisees are kind of like us, like Baptists, The Pharisees were very sticklers for the Word of God. That's why you see in that fraction they say, we know that you speak the truth. You don't dilly-dally. You don't bounce around the truth. You just speak the truth. Speak it like it is. That's what we want you to do. Speak it like it is. But of course, they were trying to trick him up. Not all the Pharisees were on the same base with Jesus. Some of them were with him. So his disciples were probably Pharisees. Many of them were probably with him, but not all of them. Some of them had real problems with the kind of teachings he was going about too. So they were trying to trip him up. And then there were the Herodians. Oh gosh, what a mix! Pharisees who believed in the resurrection of the body, Herodians, many of them who were probably Sadducees who did not believe in the resurrection of the body, and we have the Herodians. Oh gosh, the Herodians get the name from Herod. The Herodians were pretty much neck and neck with the Romans. They were kissing cousins of the Romans. They had no trouble with the idea of taxation, but even if it was on a denarius. Now, a denarius in this case was what Cohen brought out, had the face of Caesar on it. In this case, it may not have been Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was long since dead by this time. But after that, almost all the Roman emperors were called Caesars. Mm-hmm. And later on, at some point in time, if you were even higher up in the power base, you'd be called Augusti. So by the time you get to King Constantine, he was made to be a Caesar when he was still about in his 20s. And then at some point in time, he got to be a co-Augusti. And later on, he got to be the main dad. He was the only Augustus there was. Mm-hmm. At some point, but that's not until the 3rd century. This is still in the 1st century AD. And during this time, most of the leadership in that time, the emperor was called Caesar. So it could have been any number. I think I've heard somewhere that it might have been Emperor Claudius. And Claudius among the emperors wasn't that bad. I mean, there's some guys. Caligula was really bad. Caligula was a horrible fellow. And he was there during the very early times of Jesus' ministry. And then he died off, and I think they pushed in his uncle, who was Claudius. But each of the emperors were called Caesars at this time. So that whoever that was on that face, I'm not certain. But he was the leader of the Roman world. Yeah. And one thing that they required of them, besides all the other taxes, which were even more onerous, was that they had to give every person in the empire had to give 1 denarius. Now for Pharisees, this was tantamount of idol worship. Here was somebody who was expected to get obedience. You're supposed to obey the emperor. You're supposed to do what he says. You're supposed to follow him wherever he said to go. If he said jump, you said how high. That's what you're expected to do in their world. But for the Pharisees, they considered this to be idolatry. Yeah. This was horrible. So that's really what they're trying to trick Jesus up on. Mm-hmm. If Jesus answered this question, whether we should give money to taxes, if he had said that in the affirmative, yes, you should give money to taxes to the Caesars, they'd say, aha, there you go, you're for idolatry. We got you now. But the Herodians, they didn't care anything about giving up money. The Herodians, like I say, were like this with the Romans. They were like this with the temple priests. You remember Jesus cleansed the temple because he said of them, you make it made into a den of thieves. Better for it to be like a house of prayer. Yeah. In fact, during a time before Jesus came into play, there was a whole bunch of folks called the Essenes. The Essenes had literally gotten enough of what was going on in the temple. The temple was at the time of Jesus, and with the Romans there, the temple's money was brought in. It's a whole lot of money brought in, all kinds of offerings they had all the time, especially during Passover. Whole lots of money, and a big chunk of that went to Rome. So a whole bit of that money, so that the temple was a money-making institution. And the people that ran it, the Herodians and some of the Sadducees, they pretty much also got wealthy right along with the Romans. So there was a lot of anger amongst the people because they saw these special people over here in this special group, kind of like in America we've got the 1%ers who own everything. They own so much. They only want 1% of the population. That's kind of the way it was back then. They had this small percentage of people that ran the show, and then all the rest of the people were somewhere in the middle class and in the poor class and down as lower than that. When Jesus talks about the shepherds were the lowest of the low. A shepherd really, when you find in the Lord's Prayer, Lord's Prayer says, give us this day our daily bread. A man back then, except for some people who were wealthy merchants or something like that, a man worked for his daily bread. They didn't work like we do for a weekly bread or even bi-weekly bread or monthly bread. They worked for a day's bread. If they didn't get money for that day, they just didn't have food that day. That's the way it was. And so And so that was a situation they have in this day. And so we had the Herodians, who were part of this group here coming to Jesus, on one particular minority group who had a real vested interest in making sure the taxes kept coming on up to Rome. And we had the Pharisees who said, no, I don't want to do that taxation. That's evil. That's worship of the devil. And so it's kind of strange we had these two guys coming together. I don't imagine they actually, got them up on the cordless phone. They didn't have cordless phones in those days, but they probably, I can't imagine they actually put their heads together. You can imagine them showing up because this guy Jesus was interesting to them. They wanted to see what he was up to. He was doing miracles. We've got to check. I'm sure they probably came for various reasons, but they happened to come in this one particular moment and have an opportunity to trip up Jesus. Now, he was too smart for them. He perceived, it says. He says he perceived that they were up to no good. Whose image and inscription on this? And they said to him, Caesar's. He said, Caesar. He looked at them and he saw that he said that they perceived their wickednesses. And it said, why do you test me, you hypocrites? It's another interesting word, the word test, by the way. In the Lord's Prayer, one of the original translations, we have translated it, do not deliver us from evil. But one of the original translations, like you find in the New English Bible, it says, do not put us to the test. Testing was something Jesus didn't like too much either. I used to work at a factory, I used to repair cameras. And there used to be a job I had to do repairing a camera. And the thing about it is, if you wanted to send it, in those days you send a camera and we just give you a complete overhaul. Don't send it in for an overhaul, just ask us to clean it up. We just fix the whole thing. Well, when you put the whole thing back together again, it'd have to go over to these supervisors, these inspectors. And they would take the camera and they would test it with all their equipment, make sure it was up to spec. And if it wasn't up to spec, right where it's supposed to be, they sent it right back to you. They were supervisors of quality control. Well, in many respects, we got tested a lot while I was working there. If it failed the test 3 times in a row, they just gave them a new camera. Couldn't bring it up to snuff. And so that was a test that I know something about. And many of us are tested in many ways. And no doubt Jesus didn't like the testing either. He could tell that these guys coming up here were up to no good. I mean, there are sometimes, when you see somebody coming up to you, you just know they're up to no good. They got trouble written all over their face. You know what they're up to. And Jesus saw through all this, and so he turns the question back on them. Jesus had a knack sometimes of changing the question. My favorite example of that is a story he gives of the Good Samaritan. The question before him at that time was, who was our brother? But Jesus had said that you should love your brother as yourself. And so another Pharisee came and said, who was my brother? They wanted to find out who we're actually supposed to love, okay? We want to know who we're supposed to love in this case. And so they asked, who was my brother? Jesus told them the story of the Good Samaritan. There was a man beat up on the side of the road. Along came a priest. He looked at him and he walked away. And then another Levite came along, probably a deacon of the church or something. He went by looking, then he went away on the other way. Along came a Samaritan. The Samaritan, of course, was a really hated guy. They didn't like Samaritans. A good Jew would go out of his way, 30 miles out of his way, to avoid the land that was touched by Samaritans. We didn't like that land at all. But here is a Samaritan who took pity on the man inside the ditch. He pulls him up. He wipes off his wound, takes him over to an inn, gives him a room, and gets him all fixed up. And even tells the guy when he gets ready to leave, I'll come back by here again. If he needs any more care for it, I'll pay for it. Now that was a good man. That was a man who cared for his neighbor. And so Jesus in the end asks us some funny question. He doesn't ask who's the neighbor here. He changed the question. He asked the question, which one was neighbor to the man who was stricken? He made, instead of neighbor being an object of the verb, he made it into a verb. Who was neighbor to the one on the side? Jesus had a knack for changing the question. You know, sometimes when these press conferences are taking place, sometimes the person asked the question will change the tenor of the question. You know, I remember President Obama on occasion is actually saying sometimes that I reject the premise of your question. The premise, that's the word. I reject the premise of your question. And he answered another way. Now that's kind of the way Jesus is doing. He kind of rejects the premise of the question. Mm-hmm. So he turns the question back on them. And he said, whose image in the scripture is this? You know, they knew the image of the scripture was Caesar. That was the physical representation within that part of the world. So they knew what was on there. And so he says to them, said Caesar's image is on there. And he said to them, render therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Mm-hmm. Now that for them was a really amazing comment. But I thought it's kind of strange. Maybe the Herodians weren't terribly, they were taken aback, because that's kind of way of dealing. You know, that they had planned this out so well. Mm-hmm. If he had come out and said that no, you should not pay the taxes and give God first, the Pharisees would have been happy. The Herodians would say, aha, we got him for insurrection. We can bring him up on charges. We can get him on the cross. We can get him now. We don't have to wait around for the Sanhedrin to put their heads together. We can do it right now. They had a nice plan here. But Jesus messed it up. Now, if the Pharisees looking back and said, oh, he chooses to pay the tax, we got him. We got him. Yeah, we can kick him out of branch of the church. We can excommunicate him. We can defrock the guy. Yeah, we can get rid of him. He's a bad example for our folks. Nah, that didn't work out too well for them either. But he turned the question around. Yeah. But I've always thought about that question. Render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Mm-hmm. Paul taught, in one of his letters to the people, he taught that God put rulers over us. Christians were supposed to obey the rulers within their land because God put them there. Right. God is in control of all things. And if God is in control of all things, then God put him there. I mean, I have my problem with President Trump. I have major problem with Mr. Trump. But God may have put him there. Mm-hmm. God very easily could have put him there. It didn't look like he was going to win. It surely looked like Hillary was going to win. Everyone said Hillary was going to win. But out of the blue turns out that Mr. Trump ends up getting a lion's share of the electoral college vote. Oh, Mr. Trump had, before the election, been saying he wanted to get rid of the electoral college. I guess he doesn't say that anymore. But see, God might have had his plan for putting a man up there like that. Maybe it's necessary for him to face us, to see ourselves. There was a writer I listened to, Ms. Guyton. Ms. Guyton has suggested that maybe Trump might be the kind of the image of who we are inside. We don't like to think about that. We like to think that, oh no, he's some crazy outside aspiration. We don't want to believe that. But he might represent a kind of the embodiment of all the racism, all the self-centeredness, all those things just coming up to the top and showing itself in President Trump. Amen. He might be. That was an interesting story. I've taken it sometimes and emailed it to a couple of friends. I think it's really something for you to think about. God may have put him up there to make we as Americans pay attention. Mm-hmm. Look around. Look at yourself, the guys who are taking a knee instead of it resulting in the fella being fired. Now practically everybody in the NFL is taking a knee. You've got a large number of people take knees, blacks, whites, doesn't matter, they're taking a knee. Yeah. That turns out to actually be a very respectful way in which to show your respect. Taking a knee. I heard a fella today on YouTube. He was talking on Face the Nation. Talked about it and how he said that at first he didn't understand about this sort of thing, but then he started thinking about it, and realize that taking a knee is actually a very respectful form of showing your distaste about something. But it's also doing it in a very respectful manner. After all, he is only expressing his rights as a citizen to make his expressions, his feelings known. Mm-hmm. You know what's that? One of the great early Americans. I can't remember his name right now, but he served as president for a while. He said, "I may not agree about what you're saying, but I will defend until the death your right to say it." That's the way we ought to be as Americans. We defend your right to say it, even if we don't like it. I may not like what President Trump says, but I defend his right to say it. And he twits it like mad. He does a lot of it all the time, but he has a right to say it. We have a free country. We don't have Putin's world over there in Russia, where he doesn't allow that sort of stuff. People who say that kind of thing get thrown in jail. We don't have that kind of world. And God may have put him here. And so if God is putting him here, then we need to support him. That's what Paul taught. Even in his time, he had some people, like I say, Caligula was a really bad dude, and Nero came along. He was not such a nice guy. There were all kinds of various emperors, but Paul taught them that they are supposed to be following after and following the will of government within them. And so they were required, everyone, to give a denarius. Now, denarius was approximately what a person would earn in one day. I thought to myself, not too long, I thought, well, that's not that much, actually. When you get right down to it, one day's worth, I mean, we pay an income tax, 10 to 15%? And one denarius, one day's worth is what? Oh, gosh, I'm not too good with my math, but it's way more. It's way less than 10%. But they had all kinds of other taxation that really stick them hard. So that wasn't the only thing that was required of them. But it was a tiny, small amount. And yet it was enough that the Herodians and the Pharisees thought be enough to trick him up. But he says, render unto Caesar the things which are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Now, what are God's things? I started thinking about that. In a sense, I caught thinking to myself, maybe the Herodians missed an opportunity. They could have come back to him and said, but God has all things. God owns everything. So that means, where does that put Caesar? They could have gotten him if they had pursued that tactic. But what does God really care about? Jesus was asked the question, what are the great commandments? He said, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second is likened unto that. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. We studied not too long ago about the Ten Commandments. And in all things, the love of God, the first, second, third commandments, all to do with all about the proper placement and position of God, then the keeping the Sabbath holy, all of God's day, and then all the way down, all of it talked about love. All of it talked about love. Yeah. If you really truly had love of all people, if you did have love your neighbor as yourself, then all these other things would take care of it. You wouldn't do any stealing. You wouldn't do any lying. You wouldn't be caught in adultery. You wouldn't be doing any of that other bad stuff, because love would take over your life. In very real sense, Jesus was saying, give love. You give love to God. You go ahead and give what physical stuff to the emperor. You go ahead and give that to him. That's fine. If that's what he cares about, we'll give him his denarius. No problem there, because we're going to love God. And that's what we need to remember. Yeah. We get so involved sometimes with the things we have to have, and they're necessary. But I'm so pleased in the way that my mother took care of me before she died. My mother was asking me, what do ministers do when they retire? Well, I told her, well, if you're a Methodist, you're taken pretty good care of. After 25 years of service, you get full retirement. Not bad. But I wasn't Methodist. If you're Presbyterian, well, Presbyterian's not too bad. They have a nice retirement program for their ministers. Not bad at all. Baptists, Southern Baptists used to not be too bad. They used to have a retirement program for Southern Baptists. I used to pay into it. Then the Southern Baptist said, we're going to get out of retirement. We're getting out of that. So we just take what you got and stick it in a 401k. That wasn't so good. In fact, I knew a man in the church before I pastored that church. He literally died in the pulpit. He had to keep on preaching because he couldn't make ends meet without a little money coming in. And it was a small amount of money. He only paid him $50 a week. That little small money was necessary for him to pay his bills. And that's the way it is sometimes. Well, of course, we ministers don't actually ever retire from ministry. We keep on going. But to have to retire, to have to keep on working, that's pretty rough on the soul sometimes. And we're blessed. We have Social Security. We have Medicare. And my mother, when she asked me about that, she had an opportunity when she retired. She had some state retirement. She had an opportunity to roll back 1/10 of her income back into the program. And when she would die, I'd get half of her income. And Mama lived to be 90 years of age. So I got nice little retirement, half of what she had. That was pretty good. Then the little Social Security. I thank the Lord for how much I've got. Amen. I'm really blessed. I have her house. I'm living in a house now, and that's all paid up. I'm old enough, and the property is cheap enough that the Homestead Act take care of all the property taxes. I'm doing all right. The Lord has blessed me, even though I have practically nothing. I'm really down about the first category of income tax. So I'm real low income-wise, but I'm happy with what I've got. Amen. I thank God for many blessings He's bestowed upon me. And that's what all of us need to remember to do, to thank God even for the little things. I thank God for all that I have. And I try to show love, even to the unlovable. There are a lot of folks out here that we would rather not love. We see the people doing some things, hear them saying some ugly things, and we say to ourselves, I can't go along with that. Well, maybe you can't go along with that, but you might still love the person. You might not. We talk about, we love the person, we don't love the sin. But sometimes we shouldn't forget the fact that the person is in sin, but you still need to love them anyway. Try to get past that. I remember guys that were called what would you call there was a New Orleans minister. Can't remember he had a nickname for him, but he associated himself with drunks and drug users and prostitutes. And I know there must have been some preachers saying that you shouldn't do that. You shouldn't be associating with those evil people. But yet he continued to do that. Saint Teresa of Calcutta associated herself with those who had diseases all over the body. They're the poor and destitute throughout India. Some people might ask, why do you do that? Why don't you come back to your homeland and go to a nice church somewhere and be able to have a nice meal, nice clean clothes and that sort of thing? But Sister Teresa wouldn't hear of that. She dedicated her life to the needy about her. She looked beyond their pain, looked beyond their sin, beyond the problems in their life, and saw the person. Mm-hmm. She loved them by her actions. Yes. That is what we are to do. Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar, and render to God the things that are God's. Mm-hmm. Heavenly Father, we pray that you would lift us up and help us to know